Welcome back to B Master 79. In this lesson we take on ielts speaking part 2 and part 3 using topic 33. Describe a time when you missed or were late for a meeting. We will plan the answer together, then deliver a full band 9 response, and then handle all 6 part 3 discussion questions. First, the format. In part 2, the examiner hands you a task card. You get 1 minute to prepare and you may write notes. You then speak for 1 to 2 minutes without interruption. At the end, the examiner may ask one short rounding off question. 2 minutes is longer than most candidates expect, so a plan matters. Here is the card. Describe a time when you missed or were late for a meeting. You should say what happened, when it happened, and why you missed or were late for it, and explain what happened later and how you felt about it. Notice that the final line is 2 questions, not 1. Most candidates answer only half of it. So how do you use that 1 minute? Pick a real, specific event because detail is far easier to recall than invention. Write 2 or 3 keywords per bullet, never full sentences. Spend your last 10 seconds on the final bullet since it carries the most marks, and decide your opening line before you start so you never stall on the first breath. Here are my notes for the first 3 bullets. What happened? A job interview, and I arrived 25 minutes late. When? Spring, 2 years ago, just after graduating. Why? The metro line was closed, so I was stuck on a replacement bus in rush hour. Notice these are fragments. Nobody has time to write sentences. Now the part that actually wins marks. What happened later? The receptionist rescheduled me. I waited 2 hours. I apologized without making excuses, and I got the job. How I felt. At the time, dread. Looking back, grateful. That contrast between then and now is the single easiest way to sound sophisticated. On the right, the language I am planning to reach for. Here is the shape of the whole answer. Roughly 15 seconds to open, about 50 seconds across the first 3 bullets, 30 seconds on what happened later, and 25 seconds to close on how I felt. That is 2 minutes, and the last 2 blocks are where the band comes from. Now the full band 9 answer, broken into 4 chunks so you can see the joins. Listen for the signposting phrases at the start of each one.
I'd like to talk about a time I turned up embarrassingly late for what turned out to be a fairly important meeting, a job interview of all things. It happened about 2 years ago in the spring, not long after I'd graduated. I'd applied for a junior marketing role at a company on the other side of the city, and I'd been given a slot at 9 in the mornings. The reason I was late was a combination of bad luck and, if I'm honest, poor planning. I'd relied entirely on a route my phone had suggested the night before, and I hadn't factored in that a section of the metro line was closed for maintenance. By the time I realised, I was stuck on a replacement bus crawling through rush hour traffic, watching the minutes tick away. I ended up walking through the door 25 minutes after I was supposed to. As for what happened afterwards, the receptionist was surprisingly gracious about it. She rang up to the department and the interviewer agreed to see me at the end of the morning instead, which meant I sat in the lobby for nearly 2 hours rehearsing my apology. When I finally went in, I decided not to make excuses. I simply apologized to explain briefly what had gone wrong and said I should have left earlier. To my astonishment, I got the jobs. In terms of how I felt at the time, it was pure dread. My stomach was in knots, and I was convinced I'd blown my chances before I'd even opened my mouth. Looking back, though, I'm almost grateful for it because it taught me a lesson that has stuck with me. I now build in a buffer of at least half an hour for anything that actually matters.
Here is the complete answer on one screen, so you can pause and read it. It runs to just under 300 words, which is about right for 2 minutes of natural speech. Read it aloud once before you attempt your own. Now part 3. This is a 4 to 5 minute discussion linked to the same topic. The questions move from personal to abstract and societal. Your answers should be 3 to 6 sentences, noticeably longer than part 1, and the examiner may interrupt or challenge you. That is normal, and it is not a criticism. Every answer that follows is built the same way. Position. Answer the actual question in the very first clause. Reason. Explain the mechanism, not just the opinion. Example or contrast. Ground it or name the exception. And hedge with phrases like on the whole, I would argue, or where I would add a caveat. Hedging is not weakness. It is what a confident speaker sounds like.
Question 1. Are you a punctual person? The move here is answer then qualify then reframe as a learned discipline. Here is the answers. On the whole, yes, I'd say I'm punctual to the point of being slightly neurotic about it. I have a habit of arriving 10 or 15 minutes early and then waiting around the corner so I don't seem overeager. That said, I wasn't always like this. It's something I had to train myself into after a few embarrassing near misses. I think of it less as a personality trait and more as a discipline. Question 2. Do you think it is important to be on time? The move here is strong position, then social reason, then practical reason, then caveat. Here is the answer. Absolutely, though I'd argue the reason isn't really about the clocks. Being on time is essentially a signal that you value other people's time as much as your own, so chronic lateness comes across as a kind of quiet arrogance, whether or not it's intended. There's also a purely practical dimension. In a professional setting, one person arriving late can derail the agenda for everybody else. Where I'd add a caveat is that cultures vary enormously in how rigidly they interpret being on time. Question 3. Do you always avoid being late? The move here is honest no, then the rule you actually use in a memorable summary line. Here is the answers. I try to, but I'd be lying if I said I had a perfect record. What I've learned to do is distinguish between occasions where lateness has genuinely costly interviews, flights, medical appointments, and ones where it's fairly harmless, like meeting a friend for coffee. For the first category, I'm almost obsessive about leaving early. For the second, I'm a good deal more relaxed. I suppose I ration my anxiety rather than trying to eliminate it. Question 4. Why are people often late for meetings or appointments? The move here is signpost 3 culprits, then name each, then add the unglamorous extra. Here is the answers. I think there are 3 main culprits. The first is simply poor estimation. Psychologists call it the planning fallacy. This tendency we all have to assume that everything will go smoothly. The second is overscheduling. If you stack appointments back to back with no slack, a single delay cascades through the entire day. And the third, which people are less willing to admit, is that lateness can be a subtle form of status display. The busier you appear, the more you can keep others waiting. Add unpredictable traffic to that, and it's almost surprising anyone arrives on time. Question 5. Why do people miss important events? The move here is reject the obvious answer, then 3 layers, then end on the mundane. Here is the answer. Usually it isn't indifference, it's a collision of commitments. People double book themselves, or a crisis blows up at work at exactly the wrong moment and they feel they can't say no. There's also a slice of cases that come down to avoidance. If an event is emotionally difficult, a family gathering that's likely to be tense, say, people find reasons not to go without ever quite admitting that's what they are doing. And occasionally it's utterly mundane, a calendar invitation that never synced properly. Question 6. Are people in your country often late for meetings? The move here is refuse the yes/no, then split by context, then land a vivid image. Here is the answer. It varies a great deal by context, actually. In formal or business settings, people are generally quite punctual, partly because international norms have filtered into corporate culture over the last couple of decades. Socially, though, there's a far more elastic attitude to time. If you're invited to dinner at 7, arriving at 5:30 is perfectly normal, and turning up on the dot might even catch your host off guard. So I wouldn't say people are late so much as that two different unspoken clocks are running, and locals know instinctively which one applies.
Let us collect the language. These 8 items came out of the story itself. Turn up late. Factor something in. Crawl through traffic. Watch the minutes tick away. My stomach was in knots. Blow your chances. To my astonishment. And build in a buffer. Learn them as whole chunks, not as single words. And these 8 are for the discussion. On the whole, I would argue that, where I would add a caveat, chronic lateness, derail the agenda, cascade through the day, an elastic attitude to time, and catch someone off guard. 3 or 4 of these, used naturally, will lift a part 3 answer noticeably. Why does this rate as band 9? Fluency and coherence. It runs at length without effort, and the signposts carry the listener. Lexical resource. The idioms are precise and never bolted on. Grammatical range and accuracy. Past perfect, conditionals and cleft structures appear because the meaning needs them. And pronunciation. Stress and pausing mark the contrast between then and now, right across the full 2 minutes. One important note. Band 9 here reflects our own internal assessment against the public ielts band descriptors. It is not a certified examiner score. Use it as a model of technique, not as a guarantee. Your turn. Set a timer for 1 minute of notes and 2 minutes of speaking. Record yourself, then check that all 4 bullets were actually covered. Rebuild the story with your own event because the technique transfers but the content should not. And post your answer to one part 3 question in the comments. If this helped, subscribe to BMaster79 and I will see you in the next lesson.